Welcome back. We're discussing Europe's shift to the right in the recent EU elections and examining how policies might be shaped by this message from the voters. Joining me from The Hague is Frans Timmermans, Dutch Minister for Foreign Affairs and a former MP for the Dutch Labour Party. Here with me in London is Crispin Blunt, a member of the Conservative Party in the British Parliament and Shadow Home Affairs Minister. Let's get back to our questions. And Mr. Blunt, I wonder to what degree the economic climate, of course, it just seems to have gone from bad to worse for most people. How much that's going to continue to trigger the kind of reaction that we've seen at the polls?
Well, there is an element to what Mr. Timmermans was talking about in terms of fear of what's going to happen to people, and we're beginning to see unemployment rise pretty remorselessly now in the UK. I suspect, though, that argument will should tend people back towards the more mainstream parties. I would have hoped, and certainly towards the Conservative Party, and we've seen that trend across the whole of Europe, where people, overall in the European elections, seem to have turned to the parties of the centre-right as representing economic orthodoxy. And people understanding that the basic position, certainly in the UK, of a country that is now very heavily indebted and needs to address that debt.
Do you see it as a message, though, from the British voters to say that there is something fundamentally wrong with the way the social structure is set up, and the people who have needs, who've been here long term, then those needs aren't being met? Whereas, of course, in the case of immigrants,
no, I don't think so, because I don't think in the end, on the ground, that's actually that's fair. People are trying to exploit fear, but I don't think the reality is as reflects that. And that's why, if you actually look at where the BNP have done well, they've actually done quite well in white working class areas, which are not very well integrated, in a sense, where they've still remained white and fairly distinct, and with a small immigrant community. In areas which are much more mixed, the BNP have not done so well.
Mr. Timmermans, I wonder to what degree you think the right, especially the extreme right, has capitalised on the situation, the economic situation, and perhaps offered or tried to offer some kind of solution rather than just basically berating the incumbent governments for not doing enough in the first place.
Well, it's quite puzzling to see that with this economic situation, the driving force in the Dutch political debate is rather identity, not the economy. And the extreme right has capitalised on that. And of course, the world is so complex. Politics have become so complex that with a very, very one-sided, clear message, you can get people to vote for you. And what you should also keep in mind is that many people in the Netherlands just wanted to send a clear message to us in government that they're not happy with what we're doing.
Mr. Blunt, I was saying in the case to you, and I wonder if you fear there might be, if things don't change, there might be some kind of more visible backlash against the immigrant community in Britain, for example.
Well, obviously one sincerely hopes not. And this is really, to a degree, is now down to the establishment, as it were, to then properly get a message out to the immigrant community in the way, and making clear that they are part of British society, and making sure we make a success of our integration policies, and in terms simply of the counter-terrorist strategy here, making sure that the battle against Islamist extremists who are bent on violence is taken to Islamist extremists by members of the Islamic community here in the United Kingdom. As British citizens, this is absolutely their battle, and I just would reflect on the fact that now seeing what's happening in Pakistan is quite interesting, where it now seems that Pakistan is beginning to unite around the military and in the leadership even of President Zardari, and actually taking the fight now to the Islamists elsewhere. And I hope that we're beginning to see signs there that a decision has been made, and that Islamist extremism is not the way.
Well, let's get a call in from the US. We've got, I think it's Carter on the line. Go ahead, please.
Le Pen in France, he said he loved immigrants in their own country. I'm asking your guests, the British and the Dutch, do they support the same, say, what Le Pen said?
All right, Mr. Timmermans, I think what Carter is saying about Jean-Marie Le Pen's sentiments about immigrants being in their own country, I'll get your view on that, of course, and then to what extent maybe that view is reflected in Dutch politics.
Well, first of all, we saw that Le Pen has been defeated very strongly in two elections in a row now by Sarkozy. So there is an answer out there for the traditional right to tackle the extreme right. Secondly, I believe if you look at the Dutch situation, although the extreme right is trying to portray the situation as though we could deport people or send them back where they came from. This society would be in serious, serious trouble without our immigrant communities.
I think, Mr. Blunt, that would probably be the same in Britain as well.
That is the same in Britain. Many of our public services would collapse, and indeed that's why immigration, particularly from the old British Commonwealth and the Commonwealth today, but when the immigration happened in the 50s and 60s, was to enable our public services to keep going, and that's still very much the case today, particularly the health service.
Mr. Blunt, I'll put to you a question we got from our Facebook website. Moeen Rauf wrote in saying, as usual, when the economy is falling and jobs are being lost, blame the minorities. This is when far-right groups find an attentive audience who are willing to hear any voice that blames anyone but themselves. This is why minorities, immigrants, should be aware that their safety living in Europe is tied to the economies of the states they have adopted as home. Time for Plan B. Now, again, I've touched on this, the fear of the backlash. I mean, what do you feel? You said there's a certain amount of self-policing has to occur when it comes to extremism, but what can the immigrant community do to try to smooth things over?
Well, I'm not sure that we've. For me, it's not an economic question at the moment, and we're not seeing a backlash because of economic reasons yet in the United Kingdom. And remember, the recession has only been running now, in a serious sense, for roughly about a year. And I think it would take longer for the economic consequences of this to play out. This is still really an issue about integration and presence in the community and what loyalty there is in amongst those immigrant communities now to the United Kingdom and their sense of being British citizens. And of course, every one of the major political parties is working very hard to become more inclusive, to better reflect the whole of British society, to have immigrants or people of immigrant background represented in their political parties, to make a statement about their own values.
We're going to get a Facebook question to Mr. Timmermans too here. So this came in from Washington, D.C., from Tyler Bass, who wrote in saying, I'd say the right in Europe has just more solidarity. There are so many leftist parties, it makes for a pluralistic advantage for the right. And Le Pen notwithstanding, these guys are relatively liberal compared to their American counterparts, some for gay guys and marriage and whatnot. Now, I wonder, is the left splintering itself too much and setting up too many parties and perhaps spreading the vote too far to be able to hold on to power?
I think there is some truth to that. If you see that on the left, left-wing liberal parties, green parties have been rather successful in the elections, but they will always be relatively small parties. So I think there is a need to galvanize the left and to make sure that we're all on the same page and not fighting each other, but fighting the right. On the other hand, it is very difficult to compare the European right to the American right, because in terms of civil liberties, in terms of freedom of speech, I would certainly not argue that the European right is better off than the American right. I would be very concerned because the right to use all the opportunities you have, the right to self-deployment, is not something that is very strongly developed in the European far right as far as the immigrant communities are concerned.
A quick thought with less than a minute to go now, Mr. Blunt. With what we've seen in the European parliamentary elections, what do you expect to happen in national elections going on from here, those especially that will be coming up soon?
Well, in the United Kingdom, if you go down to the bookies, you'll be expecting a reasonably solid Conservative victory and David Cameron becoming the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. And Labour have terrible problems because of the personality of the Prime Minister, but also the simple fact they've been in office 13 years and cannot escape responsibility for the economic catastrophe that's overtaken the United Kingdom.
Mr. Blunt, I want to thank you very much, and Frans Timmermans as well. Thank you very much for being with us from The Hague.
My pleasure.
Thank you. And thank you for being with us too with your questions. On the next show, continuing questions and tensions over the election results in Iran. Is the turmoil just short-term, or could this be the start of long-running disruptions in store? From me and the team, we'll see you next time.